Now, I kind of want to explain what I mean by Geargia will never be tier 1 as long as its sectors exist. Because I say that a lot, and a lot of people don't quite get it. See, its sectors are never going to be tier 1. Ever. Never. Even if a bunch of slower decks appear as tier 1, which involves the format slowing down, which isn't going to happen, although they can kind of counter Boojins a little bit, the fact is they're inconsistent, and that is what makes the deck never going to be tier 1. However, when you have a deck like Geargia that has some expensive cards that like Dracosack, or a stupidly budget deck like Insectors, and a deck like Geargia is tier 1, and a deck like Insectors counters that tier 1. It makes Insectors relevant again, because if they counter it. They counter the tier 1 deck. And yeah, Insectors not always going to beat Geargia. I'm not saying that. I'm not even saying they're always going to win 100% of the time, but they do counterpick for some reasons I'll explain. Then that deck that could be tier 1 can never be tier 1 because, and this is the key here, budget players will all instantly flock to that answer. And they'll play that answer. Because the sectors are kind of decent against other things too. They're inconsistent, yes, but when you have a lot of people playing the inconsistent deck, that inconsistent deck has better chances of winning. And if there's a lot of the tier 1 deck, your inconsistent deck, again, it goes up higher than it actually should in a more balanced format. And that is why Geargia can't ever be tier 1, because everybody will just go to Insectors that's budget, and you're going to have a YCS or something just full of Insectors, and the Insectors are just going to kill you before you could win in Swiss to get to the top of the match. And yes, I'm sure you're going to say I can side deck, but just hold off for just 1 second, and I'll tell you about how a Geargia versus Insector match goes. This is how the Insector and Geargia players will go. And we're going to assume Geargia goes first, so whatever. So Geargia is going to go first. They're going to just play kind of a defensive game, probably set the armor, set some cards, back row. And keep in mind, before you say, oh, I've never do that against a Insector player, sure player or not, you don't know they're playing Insector. You're on a YCS or regional or even a ARG. So you just do your standard play, and then the Insector player goes, and they drop Centipede, and then they search with Centipede with Ladybug and get Hornet. And right there, you're in so much trouble. Ask any Geargia player, the second that Hornet comes to hand, even if they can't get the Insector OTK, which is Dragonfly Sword, Hornet, they really have the advantage of you, because they're always going to be able to pop that armor, so you have to go to Exceed. Except none of your Exceeds are really that good of an answer against the Insector player. 101 isn't even good. You don't want to have too many cards Insectors can pop. I'm pretty sure the most I popped in one game against somebody was 9, and I only had 1 Call of the Haunted. It's a really easy deck to loop. And you might say, oh, Phil, you're stupid. I'm just going to OTK them the next turn. No, you're not, because Insectors play 3 Wabaku. And even if they don't, they could probably do something along the lines of just a last minute to Call the Haunted. As long as the Insectors can keep their life points above 800, they will kill you the next turn. Well, not necessarily kill you, but because you were stupid and put everything all in, they're going to be able to do Dragonfly and Hornet, most likely at least pop 2 or 4 things at a time. And then they can go defensive again into either Zen Mains, Fortitude, or Agony, or whatever new thing comes out. The inherent advantage with Insectors is the fact that their search, when they do their first search, their one search, they get the answer to your deck, which is Hornet. And because you're so backward heavy and so much things to pop, you're pretty vulnerable. Whereas Geargia's search is more for their OTK tools, which Insectors counter because Insectors is really defensive, and it's hard for the Geargia player to kind of deal. And while the Geargia player is dealing with the defensiveness, the Insector players are going to keep popping your answers, and you just run out of advantage while they keep getting advantage. It's just not a good time if you're a Geargia player. Now, this actually applies to a lot of other different decks, that if these so-called decks would get good, other decks would counter, and they'd... You know, that's all I really have to say on this, because I feel like I'd just be rambling on if I kept talking and explaining. It's just, when you look at a deck, do yourself a favor and say, well, would this be countered by so-and-so budget deck. And only look at budget decks that I've kind of been topping once in a while, like something like Dark World and Insectors. And if your deck has a bad matchup, you probably shouldn't run it. Anyways, I'll see you guys later.